Hi Rete friends, welcome to Classics in Color, your weekly dive into some of the ancient world's wackiest facts. I'm Mark Graves, and today I'm going to be talking about what you could legally do to someone who was sleeping with your wife. So there were no paternity tests in the ancient world, obviously, so if you wanted to be sure that your kid was actually yours, that you were raising, you kind of had to just lock your wife in your house and never let her interact with anyone, which is not great for feminism, but I can sort of sympathize. So that was somewhat standard practice in ancient Athens and in the ancient world generally. And if you caught someone sleeping with your wife or trying to seduce her, that was a serious problem. It was an affront to you, it was an affront to your kids, because now their paternity is in question. It was a big problem. So in Athens, if you caught someone in the act, which is kind of the key, it has to be red-handed and red everything else, you could do whatever you wanted to them, basically, no holds barred. And there's a fun article on this that I read last week, The Punishment of Rhaphanidosis in Plautus's Casina, and the Reversal of the Wife's Role by Katerina Philippides, I think is how you say that name. So that's a fun article, and there are other resources out there if you want to read more about this. So that was the attitude generally throughout most of the ancient world, but particularly in ancient Athens. And as far as primary sources or ancient sources go, I want to start with Lysias, who was an Athenian. And Lysias, I'm sure if any of you have taken second or third year Greek, you're more than enough familiar with him. But he was sort of a defense attorney, I guess. In Athens, though, you couldn't hire someone to speak on your behalf. You could pay someone to write your speech for you. So you had to show up and give and speak for yourself, but you could have someone write your stuff for you. So Lysias was a professional speech or defense speech writer, and one of his cases that we have is it's called On the Murder of Eratosthenes. So Eratosthenes had seduced someone's wife and had been sleeping with them for a little bit, and the husband figures this out through the slave, and he waits a day or two because he wants to make sure that he can catch Eratosthenes in the act, and he wants to have his friends with him when he goes to confront him. And he waits, and then he shows up at the right moment and he kills him right there in his own bedroom. So it's quite intense, and the family of Eratosthenes is kind of annoyed at this because they're like, you waited a couple days, does that really count as catching him red-handed? And Eratosthenes is like, no, according to the letter of the law, I'm good. Then to turn to some even more entertaining examples, I'm going to look at Aristophanes. And you may remember Aristophanes was a comic poet. He wrote, comic plays, basically. And he wrote one in particular called The Clouds, which is one of my favorites. I love this one if you haven't checked it out. It's all making fun of philosophers and Socrates in particular. So he has this caricature of Socrates, how he's obsessed with nitpicking and all these little details that don't matter and are super esoteric. So at one point he's saying, he's so proud of the fact that he's figured out that the reason mosquitoes make that buzzing noise all the time is that they are constantly farting. So it's a little trumpet noise that their butt makes, and that's why they make that humming noise. Or later he's really proud of the fact that he's figured out how far fleas jump because he's like painted their feet, and then when they hop it leaves little paint marks, and he just thinks this is the most brilliant discovery in human history. So it's a great caricature of philosophers in general. And he also makes fun of not only their interest in like esoteric weird stuff, but he also makes fun of the fact that they are sophists, that they can bend words to their advantage, so they can make anything seem reasonable or good, and they can just talk circles around everybody and lie to your face and you won't even know it. So at one point, one of these characters is sort of doing this, trying to talk his way around stuff, and he is giving advice to someone who says that they want to sleep with somebody's wife. He says that you should just say that you're emulating Zeus, because Zeus obviously slept around with a ton of people and slept with a bunch of people's wives. So then just say that you're emulating Zeus because Zeus is Zeus, and what's wrong with trying to be like the gods, right? And then another character responds with this comedy gold. He says, but say he who's taking your advice listens to you, and then gets violated with a radish and depilated with hot ash. What line of argument will he have on hand to avoid becoming wide-arsed? So I love that the Loeb uses arsed there for whatever reason. It's quite charming. And apparently the having a radish shoved up your butt or having your pubic hair burned off were common punishments if you were caught in the act. So this similar attitude, as I said, seems to be throughout most of the ancient world and in ancient Rome as well. So now I'm going to look at Catullus 15, who Catullus was a poet and he wrote on lots of different topics, but he could be very funny at times. So he says, "'Tis you I fear, you and your penis, so ready to molest good boys in bat alike. Set in motion to your heart's content, where and how you please when you walk abroad. This one boy I would have you spare, and if infatuate frenzy drives you to the heinous crime of treason against me, then I pity you for your sad fate. For before the city's gaze with fettered feet, you shall be tortured as cruelly as an adulterer." So the lobe here, God bless them, they say, "You shall be punished as cruelly as an adulterer." They're trying to get around what the Latin actually says, which is percurrent rathanique mogisque, which more or less means that radishes and hammers are going to run right through you. So we already saw radishes, but I guess you could use the stick end of the hammer also to run through someone. So that's what the Latin is getting at. And it's also interesting here that it's not actually a wife, it's a boyfriend that he has. So, and this is all a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It's probably not something you would literally do. And one more Roman poet, Horace, in his satires, gives us a much more extensive list. So he says, "It is worth your while, you who would have disaster wait on adulterers, to hear how on every side they fare ill, and how for them pleasure is marred by much pain, and rare as it is, comes oft amid cruel perils. One man has thrown himself headlong from the roof, another has been flogged to death, a third in his flight has fallen into a savage gang of robbers, another has paid a price to save his life, another been abused by stable boys, nay, once it so befell that a man mowed down with a sword the testicles and lustful member." So again, that's a bit of an archaic translation by the Loeb. But what he's getting at is sometimes people were killed, as we've seen, for adultery, but sometimes they would be given to a gang of slaves, and you tell the slaves, gang rape this guy, apparently. And sometimes you would actually castrate them, so you would chop off the offending member, so to speak. Finally, I want to look at Plautus's play Castina, which is what that article was mainly about. So Plautus is a Roman author of these comic plays, and the plot of this one is fairly complicated, as comedies tend to be, but the basic plot is that there is a family, there's a mother, a father, and their son, and the son has this girlfriend that he's kind of got a crush on, Castina, and everybody thinks that she is a slave girl, but then this is a huge trope of Roman or Greek comedy in general. It turns out she's not a slave girl, she's a free woman, and then she can marry the son and they can live happily ever after at the end, but in the middle of the play they don't know that. So the son's dad also has a crush on her, so it's all kinds of messed up, and he's trying to marry her off to his personal slave so that then he gets benefits and he can sleep with her. So he is sort of arranging all this so that she will marry his slave, and the wife figures out everything that's going on, and she's annoyed because Casina is sort of her responsibility, and she's kind of her mentor, but also she's mad at her husband. So what she decides is she has her personal male slave dress up in the bridal gear with a veil and everything, and then afterwards go into this room that's completely dark, so you can't see anything. And then the father and his slave, the father's arranged that he's gonna get the first bite, the first dibs with Casina, but the slave sort of sneaks in before him to try to get at her first, and this is his account of what happens. So the fellow's name is Olympio, and he says, went down below further, and Partalisca says, "What?" He says, "Oh goodness, what? Gracious, is it? Oh, it was enormous. I was afraid she'd have a sword. I began looking for it. While I was checking that she didn't have a sword, I got hold of a hilt. But when I think about it, she didn't have a sword, because it would have been cold. She didn't say a word, and covered with her dress that part because of which you are women. She didn't say a word, and covered with her dress that part She didn't say a word, and covered with her dress that part because of which you are women. When I saw that the entrance was blocked, I asked her to let me enter through the other entrance." A beard punctured my lips like hog's bristles. No sooner had I got up onto my knees than she rammed my chest with her feet. I fell off the bed head first. She jumped up and battered my face, fleeing quietly out here. I came out in the outfit you see so that the old man should drink from the same cup I drank from. So the same thing more or less happens to Lysidamas. He goes into this dark room and he thinks he's gonna get to have sex with her, and then surprise, surprise, and the slave sort of starts clobbering him and he runs out and he says, "Look, my wife is facing me. Now I'm between the altar and the knife and I don't know where to flee. On this side are the wolves and on this side, the dogs." Then his wife says, "Go on, you." Return his walking stick and cloak to him. And then the slave who's been dressed up this whole time says, "Take them if you like. Clearly a great injustice has been done to me. I married 2 men today, but neither did what one normally does to a newly wedded woman." So I just think this whole scene is hysterical, and the rest of the play is as well, and it gives us a great example of the tables being turned a little bit, and the wife not killing her husband, but roughing him up a little bit through her slave. Thank you so much for checking out this video on adultery in the ancient world and its consequences, and a special thank you to subscribers and to patrons. I hope to see you next week. Kaorete!